Agile as I was looking to actually make my project management a little bit easier and smoother. So I started bringing in little bits of Agile into my project management. And next thing I knew, I was a fully Agile convert moving over to this new framework. Let's go ahead. We're going to kick off with a story. Oh, what's wrong with this turkey?
All right, looks good to me. It's perfect. Ready to go.
Yeah, it looks good, but you want to eat it?
Maybe not.
It's raw. It's very, very raw. This isn't the actual picture, but this is a story. Um, I was hosting a Thanksgiving, a Friendsgiving. So we had a bunch of friends, family that came in. My family, my kids are older, they have grown up, they have kids of their own. So they were having their Thanksgivings with their respective in-laws. And I found myself just kind of alone for Thanksgiving. I live out by the beach. And as I'm living by the beach, there's a lot of like transplant people that have moved away from their families and not close to their families, and they weren't able to travel home for Thanksgiving for the holiday. So I invited them all over and we had a Friendsgiving. It was like a potluck and it was a big party. It was a lot of fun. I had this one friend, great guy, very smart, lots good heart, really nice and kind person. And he was fully adamant that he had to bring the turkey because his turkey was the only turkey that was any good. It was his mom's recipe and all other turkeys were terrible. They all sucked. Nobody wanted to eat that kind. Nope. We had to try his turkey. And he was so adamant about it. We're like, dude, go ahead. You can bring the turkey. It's okay. Bring the turkey. Absolutely. It's all you. All right. So we're all excited about this turkey that he's been boasting about and bragging about forever. And everybody comes over. It's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Everybody comes over and they bring their hot dishes and everything's looking really, really good. And the house is smelling really good. And we lay it out on the table. We're kind of waiting for the main masterpiece, the turkey that we've been hearing about, to come in. He saunters through the door with this huge bird. I'm talking like a 22-pound, like massive turkey, like huge. And it's all seasoned and he did thaw it out, which is good, but it was flat raw. We were just staring at him going, dude, what the heck? What are we supposed to do with this? We can't eat this. And everybody's kind of giving him a hard time. What, dude, why don't you cook the turkey? Like, we can't eat this. This isn't ready. This isn't something that we can eat. And he's like, no, man, I thought we were going to cook together. I thought we were just going to have, like a good cooking and hanging out. We're like, dude, it takes 5 hours to cook that turkey. We can't eat it. So we all gave him a really hard time. Like we still give him a hard time. It's still funny. But when I thought about it, when I really actually kind of thought about it, it wasn't his fault. We just hadn't really talked about what our expectations were. Whereas he thought we were going to cook together and we are going to, have a good time cooking and then eat. Everybody else was under the assumption that we were going to eat together. So we had mismatched and mismanaged expectations. And it wasn't his fault particularly. We just something that we hadn't talked about. We didn't have what done meant. We didn't have a definition of done kind of set up and talked about. So we ate everything else. It was delicious. And we cooked the turkey. And later on down the road, we had turkey leftovers. So everybody had plenty of turkey sandwiches to go around. No turkey for the actual Thanksgiving, but plenty of turkey sandwiches. And that's why a definition of done is so very important. That is why it matters so very greatly to have a good common understanding of what we mean when we say we're done. What does that actually mean? What is it actually? What does that? How do we do that? So a definition of done is designed to help keep that miscommunication, misunderstanding from happening. It's a definition of done is a team agreement of what done means. And it's completed when all the conditions of the definition of done, when they're all met. So the product owner, the developers, the scrum master, or the whole team is going to come together and say, what is everything that we need to talk about, we need to ensure is done to call our piece of work, our product done. For each product backlog item, for each work item, whatever it is, what do we mean when we say we're done? What is that? At a minimal, a definition of done should be usable. We should be able, should include a usable product. We can send it out to our customers. It will work. It won't break anything. So it's been tested at a minimal. Lots of important reasons to have a good definition of done. You won't eat raw turkey. You won't eat raw turkey is one of them. No, we level sets and manages expectations. And this is between teams. It's between team members. It's between the team and the product owner. It's between the stakeholders. It's everybody who is involved has that same expectation of what done means. It helps the team. It helps the team as they're estimating out product backlog items, PBIs. It helps them do that because they know all the items to include when they're giving their estimates. So if they're doing any sort of anonymous, maybe using the Fibonacci sequence or some sort of relative sizing, they know to include, oh yeah, we have to include documentation and how long that's going to take. We have to include the testing effort and how complex that's going to be. We have to include all these factors, whatever their definition of done is, inside of the work when they estimate out. So it allows them kind of the barcode of what they actually need to do. It allows for easier releases. And that's just very simply because they have done all the work that's necessary to be able to release it. Should be really included in the definition of done. So it allows for easier releases, especially with integrating partners, especially with when you have two teams releasing to the same environment. It allows those increments to be integrated. Increases quality. It's very easy to feel the pressure to push out new features and just keep going. And let's just make this happen, make our stakeholders very happy and show them lots of cool stuff. And the teams always feel this pressure to push out really new features. The definition of done pulls that back a little bit and makes what really matters. Are we keeping the same quality standards throughout the project? That way, we don't fall on our faces in 3 months because we're building a crappy product. It increases transparency. This is really important. Transparency is a pillar. It is key to really bringing in a good work environment, really bringing in Scrum into your environment. We have to be transparent with our stakeholders, with our product, with our product owner, and with everything. That way we can make the right decisions. And if we show our stakeholders a product that is not matching the definition of done, it doesn't have the right quality metrics, we are essentially mismanaging their expectations and we are not being fair to them. They're going to make decisions based upon what they think they know. And if we're lying, essentially, because we are not holding the same quality standards, because we don't have a definition of done, we are lying, then their decisions, that their promises that they're making out to people are going to falter and fall. And whose fault is that? We're the ones who lied. That's our fault. They're going to come back and they're going to be upset. So it increases transparency. And here's some big ones. It decreases the technical debt and it also decreases undone work. Let's talk a little bit more about those. Undone work, it's just simply work that you didn't think about doing. It wasn't in your definition of done. It was, but we can't release until that work is done. So imagine we have a big project and we've done all this work and it's great. And we're about to have a release. And then the team's like, oh, well, we have to do this, 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 and this, and this, and this, and this, and this before we can actually release it. And it could be days of work and everybody gets stressed out and everybody creates this big fire drama. It's just work that we didn't think about. Technical debt is very dangerous. It's technical debt is when the team is pushing out new features. They're basically essentially using a Band-Aid approach. They're not building it the right way. They're building it the fast and cheap way. They're building it without a good foundation. It's not laid down correctly. It will eventually, if you do not have a good foundation, it will eventually start crumbling and falling apart. And they can't build on top of a foundation that is not solid. So if they can't build upon it because they're fixing the holes and they're plugging in things, and now we have all the money that the stakeholders are spending on the team is now getting stuck just to what they already have or think they have. They can't add anything new to it because the foundation sucks. And because of that, we can't build new stuff. And so now we have stakeholders that basically have a crappy product. It's just a mess. And we can't offer anything new. So we can't bring it out to our customers. Can't offer, and with the environment today, everything out there is moving so exponentially fast. Customers want new things like this, but we can't do it because we have a crappy foundation. So technical debt, also known as design debt, you might hear that, code debt, you might hear that. It's the implied cost of additional rework that we have to do. Because we chose that easy way out, we chose the simple solution instead of the right actual approach. And
this is me, right? What happens when multiple teams are delivering a product together? You may have that situation where team A, team B, team C are creating features or perhaps components of a product. So imagine if they didn't have a shared understanding of the work and a shared understanding of what done means, then each of those teams will come to the table with their increments to the extent where they believe they're done. But are they, right? So the acid test here is, can you integrate all of that together and deliver it to your customer? That's the first part. Even if you could do that, is it usable by your customer? We'll talk more about that in a little bit. So multiple teams working on the same product backlog have a shared and consistent definition of what done means. This is a deliberate thing. This doesn't just happen organically. They have to get together. They have to discuss what done actually means. They have to draft that up, agree on it, and then they have to police that they're actually following that. So what that does is it level sets the expectations, as Rachel mentioned earlier, between teams and with stakeholders. But I'd say also, even with customers, they always know the consistency to which they can expect the product to perform or to conform to, right? And that each of these increments can integrate successfully. So program level definition of done is like an extension of multiple teams. This is typically in the case of when you have scaled teams, right? Whatever framework you're using in scaling. So program level definitions are often rather rudimentary. When you look at them, they're not really all that elaborate. Teams build on the program DoD, adding additional requirements from their own individual teams' perspectives. But they don't do that in a vacuum. They have to do that in collaboration with all the other teams. So they don't necessarily fall foul of violating something that one of the other teams is considering a key element of their definition of done. So the message here is you should have a program definition of done on top of the individual team's definition of done. That way, it's the only way that the program constituents can have a common understanding across all of the different teams.
Like a baseline, and then we're going to build upon that. And when we do that, we're going to create a definition of done with our teams. This is something, it's a conversation that usually the Scrum Master will probably initiate. It is a team conversation. So we want everybody there. We want the product owner, the developers, basically anybody who's going to have some input or it's going to impact. We want to have them there because we want to make sure we're thinking about everything that we need to do. Now, the more extensive your definition of done is, obviously, each piece is more work. So that means that each PBI is slightly bigger because we have to make sure that all that work gets completed. It's something to keep in mind. As Scrum Masters, as you're kind of kicking off this conversation and you're really making sure that we're really having a good collaborative session, where we get the viewpoints from everybody. And then we determine which ones we're going to pick out as a team, which one we're going to agree upon is part of the definition of done. Now, there's a ton of ways you can do this. Definitely recommend kicking off a new project, with a good, brainstorming about the definition of done. Usually, often it's done in a retrospective activity. Brainstorm with everybody, maybe some silent writing. You'll get a lot more ideas out by silent writing, where everybody writes down all the ideas that are in their possible head. And then we get together and we start talking about them. You're going to get a lot of duplicates that way, and that's okay. You just bucket those duplicates together and call it one. But that's a really great way to get all the ideas out, even from the folks who, are a little quieter. They're not gonna kind of shake the boat too much. They'll still be able to quietly put down, their ideas, and we'll just get more information that way. Now, definition of done is going to change over time. New technologies are out, maybe people aren't using a user manual that they used to use. So we used to have that updating the user manual in our definition of done, but we no longer need it because it's nobody's using the user guide. So why are we spending time doing it? So we're going to adjust it as we need to, maybe every 3, 6, 9 months, whatever it's going to take really, to just ask your team, is our definition of done up to date? Do we need to change anything in here? Do we need to have a new brainstorming session? Make sure we're really, tackling everything that we need to have. But at a minimal, and this is really important, if you have a program level definition of done, that's your baseline. But at a minimal, the definition of done should include that the testing and the quality standards are being met. That piece of work, that increment, or that product backlog item is usable. You can plug and play it in everything else that has been developed. It's not going to break everything. At a minimal, it should be usable. No unaccepted defects. We're not putting stuff out in the environments that we know is a mess. We just wait, we fix them, and we don't call it done until those are fixed. The product owner can accept the work and release the increment if they choose. Now, the product owner is going to be the person who they're in charge of releasing. So they're the person who says, hey, yeah, that is done. That meets what I'm expecting. That's the valuable product that I was hoping for. And all the items of the definition of done are done. It is ready to go. We can include it in the increment. We are able to release it if we choose to. But remember, and it is important, the more items that are in the team's definition of done, the more work it's going to take to complete it. So if we have a super extensive definition of done, we have to ask ourselves, is everything in here really creating value? Is everything in here really adding something that people need? Or are we just doing it because that's the way we've always done it and it doesn't really impact the value of the product? Are we wasting time by having this in our definition of done, essentially? You want to, make sure that you have the right definition of done. We don't have to include everything. We have to include the valuable stuff in our definition of done. Kicking it to you,
So let's look at an example. We've talked a lot about what this definition of done, should contain, but let's look at a specific example in software. The tagline here, the definition of done evolves over time, is important because products evolve over time. And as the product is evolving, you need to keep up with it, right? So acceptance criteria is met and the product owner accepts, kind of like it's this basic minimum, bare minimum. The PO says this is fine. Okay, at that level, okay, this is done, right? But is it truly usable? So in engineering, you could have, for example, these items in your definition of done. And these are not necessarily an exhaustive list or anything like that, just samples. So all of the code is complete. There's nothing pending. Unit tests are done, and we have greater than 90% code coverage. Code reviews have taken place, peer reviews have taken place, and the chunk of code that's being reviewed is being approved by those reviewers. The stored procedures have been reviewed for consistency. Documentation, in that column, we have some of the normal things that you might expect, but if they're not here, then they can, fall off, right? Release notes have been updated. Public APIs likewise have been updated. Documentation, user guides. You may have products that are customer facing where user guides are important. Update those. And then anything that they need for training has been updated. In the realm of QA and testing, some of the examples for DoD would be, integration tests ran successfully and 80% of them passed, let's say, whatever the number is in your scenario. Performance page response is less than 2 seconds, for instance. So these numbers can come from the teams and also probably from the requirements themselves, but you should have those in your DoD. All of the acceptance has been tested, and then think about the criteria of the environment, right? Which environment? Is it done when it's done on a developer's laptop, right? Because oftentimes you'll see developers coming to the table say, well, I'm done with that, so it's done. Let's just mark it as done. So I jokingly say, well, if it's working on your laptops, let's ship your laptop to the customer. So pay attention to the environment and have that in your DoD. Something is done when all of these things have happened on a certain environment. Maybe you have a UAT environment or a stage environment. And then lastly here for testing, we've got regression tests. Everything thus far has been tested again and it passed. These percentages will vary, the numbers will vary, but these are just some examples that you can consider in the world of software. And again, as I mentioned, this is not an exhaustive list by any stretch, just some samplings, and you can add and embellish to this. But the key thing here is, and it's in the smallest print, it evolves over time. So don't just do it and forget about it.
You know what I like about this example? The metrics underneath, that's going to be team specific, but I love the categorization because it kind of, we have a category of engineering. Hey team, what is all the engineering practices that we have to do? We have a category, what is all the documentation? Because it kind of helps the team remember what's important, all the different areas that they need to include in the definition of done. I just like that categorization quite a lot. It's pretty cool. But you know what? We've been talking about software. Let's bring it into real life scenarios and different industries, because it kind of gives a bigger picture of why it's so important for the folks who are not technically inclined. Imagine we're planning a wedding. And you've got, and anybody who's been married, weddings can be very stressful. There's a lot of stuff that goes into planning a wedding, right? But we want to make sure that we are in agreement. We've got some consistency here. Planning a wedding, all receipts are in that Dropbox folder, and we've agreed to payment. The contracts have been signed. We have everything that we promised for our wedding planning to help make sure we're all nice and easy. We're all on the same page, and we all know what is going on. We're not scrambling at the last minute going, oh, you didn't put the receipt in the Dropbox folder. And then, my God, why did that not even happen? What about learning a new topic or education? You guys can relate to this. Imagine, you're a teacher. We've got to make sure all the handouts are prepared for all the modules. Is a lesson plan created? We've all the chapters have been presented. We can't say we've taught the class if we haven't presented everything we planned on. All the work has been reviewed. It's been discussed. It's been tested. Everybody's passed, whatever it may be. But it kind of brings it into more of a real life. Like, oh, okay, I understand now. Imagine we're cleaning the house. What does it mean when my husband says he cleaned the house? Is all the cleaning completed? All areas pass a white glove test? I mean, all the tools, I can just picture him cleaning the house and leaving all the cleaning tools everywhere. Do I want to have company come over? Do I feel like I am ready for the customers? No, I got cleaning tools all over the house. So what do we mean when we say that we're done? We can bring it in so many different areas into our lives and so many different industries. For doing food for a party, the food is expired. Everything's been cooked, everything's seasoned, everything's been tasted and tested to ensure that it's fully cooked. We're not eating raw turkey. What does done mean? and throughout many different industries. This is not just software. I love those software examples that we had. But it's not just software, it can be any industry all over the place. All right, tossing it to you.
So far, we've kind of just listed a checklist of some items that potentially can qualify to go on a list definition of done. I'd like to look at this in a slightly different lens, from a slightly different lens even. So somebody came up with, John Miller came up with this acronym FINISHED. And the question here is it finished? When is something finished? And so I really like this. We're presenting this here with his permission. So FINISHED, the acronym stands for functional, integrated, no known issues, inspected, supportable, honor standards, essential documentation, and it's deployment ready. So under each of these buckets, if you think about your realm, at work, and figure out what needs to go in here, I think you'll come up with something that's a bit more than simply just just a flat list, basically, because a list doesn't have the context behind it, right? I can have 20 things on my DoD and I can check them all off, but at the end of the day, it's still not fit for use by the customer. Whereas following something like this, you stand a much greater chance of getting it there. So I really like this. Functional is really, it works as intended, right? And so it meets the ACs essentially. Integrated, works with everything else around it. So it's not just the engine sitting on a block. It's actually the full vehicle. No known issues that we know of at this point. And it's been tested, right? So this is your pre-inspection. You're buying a car and it comes with a pre-inspection. It's supportable, right? You don't just float it out there to the customer and then not know how to keep the thing alive, right? So it needs to be supportable. It needs to fit standards. Now, these could be standards that are internal to your organization, or these could be regulatory standards that you have to meet. Essential documentation must be completed, because otherwise the increment or the product that you're trying to deploy may not be accepted because the customer requires a certain level of documentation, for example. And then last but not least, do you have it packaged, right? Is it just sitting on a shelf somewhere, or do you actually have it packaged and ready to go and it can be deployed upon demand? So I really like this acronym. I urge you to look at it. And again, this is courtesy of John Miller. But it's a different way of looking at definition of done. So if you were to look at this for each of the letters and put down all the items that need to fit into those, I think you're going to have a pretty extensive, thorough definition of done. So we looked at the previous one as finished. Now this is again a different angle on levels of done, right? Is it done? Is it done enough? Is it overdone? Right. So this is really geared toward making sure that we have fitness for purpose. That's the idea. And Peter Stevens came up with this. So he's got this kind of a heat map, if you like, or scale on the side, where works on my machine by a developer. Yeah, that doesn't even come close to the definition of done. It simply lets the team know that yes, it compiles, right? That's about it. It hasn't been tested. We don't know how good it is, but it works. So just because that's the case, we shouldn't mark something as done. We should say, okay, that's good. What else? And so going from bottom up on this kind of scale, if you will, right? Is it functional? Meaning, does it meet all the ACs, the acceptance criteria for what the intention was for this piece of work? Then if it does, do people agree? Has it been inspected by the team? Does everybody agree that this actually is functional and that it is working? So everything builds on itself as you look down on this scale, right? So now that it's been inspected, everyone agrees it works, it's functional, and is it integrated? Because it's only a piece of it, right? So is it integrated together? So you've got the engine, it's working fine, but is it really working with the transmission, let's say, right, in the vehicle? So integration is important here. Lastly, or it's not lastly, we have automation. So have the tests been passed, meaning that everything else you had before this worked, now you've changed something and added onto it, Did you break anything that used to work? So regression, all of the above, deployment ready, reviewed. If you think through these, and there's an explanation to the side of what each of the keyword or keywords mean, I think you, again, have a pretty good chance of coming up with a thorough DoD, no matter what line of work you're in. Is it reviewed by everybody, with the customer even, right? This happens at periodic sprint reviews or customer demos. Has it been deployed? Is it available? Can they touch it, feel it? Or is it simply in a sandbox somewhere? Is it getting traction? So now it's deployed in an environment, they can look at it, but are they looking at it? How do you know it's successful? And then are they getting value if they're looking at it? And lastly, number 10, very few teams actually even get to that level. Has it been optimized? So building robustness into it. Teams often leave it at perhaps 7, and they move on to something else because there's another thing pressing on their day. So I urge you to look at this, especially the top 2 or 3, and make sure that they're incorporated in your definition of done. I think you'd have happier customers. So let's assume you've done that. You've done your due diligence. You've now created this fairly thorough definition of done. That's it, right? Are you done with the definition of done? Well, you're not done, because it is not a one and done type of situation. Definition of done needs to be revisited. And there doesn't have to be a fixed cadence. It's not like you must revisit it every quarter or anything like that. It's contextual. So it needs to be revisited as needed. If you're working on a product that's fast moving, maybe you need to revisit it fairly often. If you're working on a product that is fairly predictable, the release cadence is predictable, then okay, tie your updates to that sort of cadence. So come back and look at it. And I think we mentioned some of these before, natural upgrades, there's new technology coming up. You do some big refactoring and try and obliterate some of your tech debt. New expectations come in. People are now saying, well, we want a much more granular level of documentation, for example. Okay, so these things need to be incorporated back into your DoD. And you can only do that if you keep coming back to it and improving on it as you go. Feel free to remove things that are no longer relevant. So the key point here is it's not one and done, right? You're always having to go back to it if you're doing it right.
All right. And I know we promised in the outreach for the webinar that we would send out a template for a definition of done. This is just a brainstorming template. You can change it up for whatever is going to work for your team. But when you're creating a definition of done, the most important thing, do we have everybody here? We have a product owner here. Do we have the entire team here? Do we have everybody who is going to add value and input into the items that we need in the definition of done? That's probably the first off, the most important thing. How you conduct your brainstorming session, that's up to you. Like, you guys can work in whichever avenue is going to create the best definition of done for your team. But we do have a template. Actually, can we send out a link to everybody? I have a mural. I want to show you guys. We can actually walk through creating a definition of done together. I think we have time for that.
Yep, I just put the link in the chat. So if you're able to grab that link, I will send out a template for this that you can copy and reuse, and that will be in the email as well. So keep an eye out for that.
Awesome, thank you. So go ahead, jump on that link, and we'll create one together, just so you can get the idea of what it feels like to create it. We did put the different categorization. This is kind of looking a little software heavy, but you could change the categories if you're in a different industry to something that more matches where you're at. But for this case, let's just go with software. And we're going to kick off with a silent brainstorming. We're going to kick off with ensuring we've got all the ideas from everybody who has an idea. So to do this, we're going to grab a minute. We're going to hit the first column, the first section, engineering. You double click anywhere inside of one of these sticky notes. Just grab your own sticky note that you like and double click and put any idea that you think should be included in your team's definition of done. go ahead, see some ideas coming in here. I'm gonna put in code complete, obviously. So if you just double click inside of the sticky note, you'll be able to add some text in there. And we're not gonna go too extensive here. It's more of just want to show how to facilitate this kind of session. We're all being very quiet right now. We'll grab these, they're probably gonna be duplicates. We'll bucket those together, and then we're gonna vote on which ones actually have a lot of value. Now, normally, we'd have a back and forth conversation about it, but we can't do that with the webinar, so we'll just do our best to kind of work around that. We've got peer reviews being done. Peer reviews, I've got a bucket there. Test and works, code complete. Down here at the bottom of the template, you guys can use some of these examples if you chose. Data dictionaries updated, stored procedures are reviewed. These just kind of ideas to get the brain flowing. Oh, did we think of that? Did we think of all the work that really needs to be completed as far as for engineering practices? So the simple thing now, just pretend we have enough ideas. I am, as a facilitator, I am going to just kind of grab the ones that are very similar and bucket them together. That's going to be one bucket. And then I'm going to take tested, quality standards are met, okay. Peer reviews are done, got a big bucket here, acceptance criteria met, code complete. And now I'm just going to ask everybody, hey, which one does anybody disagree with having this in our definition of done, and why? Why do we disagree? And we'd have just an open conversation at this point. What do we feel like about each one of these? Is there any concerns here? And then after that, we would talk about which ones as a team that we are accepting. And you do want the whole team to be on board for this. Let's just imagine everybody agrees with all of these, and they all then move into the accepted category. And we have our first section for the definition of done ready. And then we're going to move on to the next category. We write down all the testing metrics that we feel. I say I already have some in here. Regression tests are passed, peer test and developer tests completed. We've got our unit testing done. That's awesome. And we're just going to simply go through each one of the categories just as we did. We'll start with that silent writing. We'll bucket the like ones together, and we're all then going to talk open conversation. Let's agree on it. Let's make sure we really understand it. Let's make sure that we are all on the same page. We take the ones that are actually accepted by everybody, and we move them into our accepted area. Now we can go through engineering, testing, documentation, or additions. Kind of an open one that we put in for random things that might be more team specific for you. Let's see, passes security virus check. That's a great random one. That's a great one. So after we have created our definition of done, how do we communicate it? This is important. It doesn't help to have a definition of done that's hidden. If we're not being transparent and nobody knows what done means to us, it has very little value to the greater organization. I personally like to put it everywhere, and I do mean everywhere. Obviously, the team is aware because they created the definition of done. We collaborated with the team. They came up with the items. We talked about it and we accepted it as a team. So we've got the team on board. I like to put it though on the dashboard of our tools right out there. This is our definition of done. Just type it out. I have put it in emails, sending it out to everybody. Hey, this is what our team considers as done, just for a heads up. Definitely have used it in sprint reviews. And by the way, Mr. and Mrs. Stakeholder, you guys remember, this is our definition of done. So when we are showing you, this is what it means. It means that we have met all of these metrics. We have met, this is what we are giving you. We don't want to ever show anything to our stakeholders that doesn't meet that definition of done. If it doesn't mean it, then we're mismanaging their expectations, and we're going to have some real big concerns. So this template's great. You can modify it for your teams, make it, make the buckets how it's going to, suit your teams the best. Just remember, it's an open conversation with everybody on the team, and we want to get everybody's inputs and ideas. If somebody, is going to have an idea that nobody thought of, I really want to have a full brainstorming session on this. I really want to make sure that we've got all ideas so we can discuss them and talk about them, even crazy ones, even ones that are really far left field. I'm sure that might not make it in the definition of done. The team may not agree to take that left field item, but we want to hear it because we want to be able to consider it. Is it something that we need? You guys can use this template. I hope it finds value for you as you work with your teams. You're going to want to adjust it every so often, like Owen was saying, depends on how many changes are in your environment. Are you very static and steady? You might not need to adjust it very often. But if you're lots of moving and grooving and things are changing all the time, you might want to readjust it, just to fit the need for your group and your team. I'm going to open up some just questions. I see we have some questions in the chat. Do we want to shout these out loud or do we want to?
Yeah, I can do that if you like, and then we can just answer those,
Sure.
ad hoc. So the first question I'm seeing here is what metrics and key performance indicators can we establish to measure the effectiveness of the definition of done in terms of product quality, customer satisfaction, and team performance? It's an excellent question. You do need to measure how well you're conforming to your DoD. And one of the easiest ways to do that is take on the customer perspective. So when customers report defects, for example, don't hurry up and just fix them. Of course, do that. But at the same time, figure out which of those DoDs was basically the culprit, was violated, which led to that escaped defect, right? It's in production, the customer saw it. Even if it's in UAT, they saw it, and that's considered an escaped defect, as opposed to just a bug that the team finds in their normal day-to-day. So what metrics can we use? One of the things you could do as a team or a team of teams is to say, we will not accept anything that is reported by the customer, at all, right? That's very stringent. Or you could say maybe 5 of these bugs of lower severity are okay. We'll recognize them. We'll figure out why we missed them, but we don't have to hurry up and fix them right away because they're lower severity. So having a conversation with the customer. Yes, thank you for reporting that. We've taken that on board, and they will be triaged with all of the other priority items that we have. But that number that I mentioned, 5, that might be a metric that you decide to kind of self-impose on the team or teams. Other KPIs are always a lagging indicator. So you look back and say, over the last release, we missed so many, right? These are kind of standalone numbers. It's hard to aspire to a number like that. So you may want to talk about OKRs, which are different than KPIs, but I don't want to get too far into this here, the differences. When it comes to product quality, look for root causes, like, for example, test metrics, right? Look at your QA test metrics and say, we released this product even though we had 80% code coverage. Maybe we need to look at ratcheting that up a bit, right? Maybe we should get to 90%. But this is a conversation that the team needs to have with one another, or a team of teams need to have. One person cannot just simply impose that. Hopefully that's helped answer that question. Great question. All right, moving. Do you have anything to add to that, Rachel, before I move on?
No, I felt like you covered it pretty great.
Okay, all right, moving on to the next one. Mindful of the time as well. The next one says, in a distributed or remote team setup, how do we ensure that the DoD is effectively communicated and understood by all team members across different time zones and cultural backgrounds? I'll start off and I'll let you finish off, Rachel. So the key here is make it visible, right? You want to keep it visible. And Rachel mentioned she puts that everywhere. I'm a big fan of using dashboards and have the team focus on a single canvas, which is the dashboard. However, in your backlog or your, let's say if you're a Kanban team and you have a Kanban board, if you're a sprint-based team, you have your sprint boards, you can actually use these DoD elements in the policies of your columns for your Kanban boards, right? So when something says development's complete, well, does it check all the boxes for you from your DoD that it's complete? When is it out of QA, right? All of the QA checks have to be met. So you can look at those things. And then last thing I want to say here is, as far as communicating across different time zones and cultural backgrounds, is have one canvas for everyone to look at. Collaboratively create it, keep revisiting it frequently, even if you don't update it, so people don't forget where it is, then make it accessible to them. Over to you, Rich.
Yeah, I'm gonna totally agree with everything you said, and talk about it a lot. It's a great subject piece to talk about during the sprint review. And it's just quick because we want to make sure our stakeholders understand, and also it's kind of a reminder for the team. When the team is doing refinement sessions and they're doing their sizing efforts, if they are, we can always ask, did you remember to include everything in the definition of done? Remember that includes this, and this. And that might impact the size that they call the item. But just bringing it up, making it very visible and talked about often. This is important. This is what we mean when we say we're done. Make sure your product owner does not accept work that is not done. Well, don't make sure, but if it doesn't meet the definition of done, it is going to cause a damage. So talk to your product owners. Product owners doesn't accept the work. There's a natural flow where the team is going to start naturally making sure that the work is accepted. So make it a good conversation piece. Make it there's tasks. You can do one-click tasks on some of the tools out there that will automatically populate the tasks for the definition of done items. I've seen teams that chose to do that to help make sure that it's very visible. Every time they do sprint planning, those tasks are automatically added. It's just part of the definition of done tasks. That's a chance. What really matters is that it is visible and visible across from everybody, and that we're all remembering that we created this together and we're all keeping it front and foremost. For sure.
Awesome. Thanks for that. All right. So moving on to the next question. When dealing with cross-functional teams, how do we ensure that the definition of done addresses the diverse perspectives and responsibilities of each team member while maintaining a unified standard? Okay, there's a few things there. So let's unpack. You've got cross-functional teams, so they already know how to use the definition of done. Presumably, you've done the knowledge sharing with them. To ensure that the DoD addresses the diverse viewpoints of these team members, I think the key there is, again, one canvas and then active participation from everybody. And obviously, with any team, you have team members that are more kind of outgoing and other team members that are more reserved. So you can use techniques such as the one Rich mentioned earlier, silent brainstorming. Everybody just simply types and they're anonymous on the board. So no one sees what someone else is typing. You might have noticed on the mural board, there were no names other than, Rachel's and myself. You were anonymized, right? That's the key. So make it a safe environment for them to contribute, and then ensure that everyone's viewpoints are on that board so they have buy-in. And then the last piece of this is, unified standard. And I think that is somewhat contextual to your world, I guess, but put those standards up front and center. Make a panel next to that mural board and list all the standards for people to look at as they're brainstorming and as you're having that discussion.
That's a great idea.
Anything else to add to that?
No, if we just kind of brainstorm together, especially anonymously, you'll get everybody's input. We want everybody to put their input down. Might shout out a couple of questions. Hey, did we think about our testing efforts? Did we think about our documentation? That particular template helps a lot because it already kind of, buckets it into those major categories. But you're going to find what works. If you're finding that your product, when they're putting it out there, it's starting to fall apart, you might want to talk to them and say, hey guys, is our definition of done? Does it include everybody's point of view? Because I'm seeing that it's not really working all the way. So what's going on? So you might just, raise it to the team if we're feeling like it's not addressing everybody's perspectives and everybody's responsibilities and accountabilities. It might just be time to readdress the definition of done conversation.
Excellent. All right, let's move to the next one. We have some great questions today.
Yeah.
What mechanisms can we put in place to regularly review and update the definition of done, fostering a culture of continuous improvement and learning within the team? So what mechanisms can we put in place? Would you like to start with that one? obvious answer to me is, this doesn't need extra meetings as such, right? You're always talking about how to improve in your retrospectives, and this falls under what went not so right for us, what went wrong for us. Well, we released this thing, and we found some issues. The customer reported issues. There was some quality issue, whatever it was. So during your retrospective, you can talk about your definition of done. If it comes to the point where there's a significant overhaul needed, then you might set up a separate meeting. But I'd say you don't necessarily even have to.
Yeah, and every team, I don't want to put a standardization on there that all teams need to review their definition of done every 3 months. It's going to be team specific. So really, as when you're watching and you're trying to help increase the team's effectiveness and their efficiencies, you just sort of start seeing things slip away, then that might be time to raise it. And I use retros personally most often. I use it as a retro topic for that period of time. Just make sure that it's being addressed as you see the need, or as you see issues coming up, we may need to kind of just take a look back at it. I don't think there's a hard true we have to do it every 2 months or 6 months, because it's going to be different. Even the same team may need to address it a lot when they're first putting it out. We're all gathering together. We're a kind of a younger team. Then we're probably going to need to tweak our definition of done until it's right. And then once it's good, they don't need it anymore, not very often. So hard rule, maybe look at it every 6-9 months, but it's really going to be team specific. Just make sure it's working. That's the goal. Make sure it's working.
Yeah, agreed. All right, next question is, how can we balance the need for a comprehensive definition of done with the risk of overburdening the team and impeding productivity?
Great question.
Yeah,
That
the
is an
balance
amazing
questions are
question.
always good, right? So the word comprehensive, start with something and then refine it over time. If you have a new team, you're going to start with a brainstorming session. You'll come up with a V1, if you like, of your definition of done. And that may not suffice 3 or 4 sprints out. You may come across other things and say, perhaps these things should be included there. Well, when you're talking with your team, go ahead and decide to include them as a team and add it in. Now, as far as the risk of overburdening the team and impeding productivity is concerned, as long as you're not putting on extra meetings to discuss this way too often, things like that, I don't see this as an issue unless I'm missing something. I mean, the team should be talking constantly about how to get better, right? Because we're in that relentless pursuit of, perfection, right? We never reach there. So I don't think they're going to have too much of an issue unless you say, well, we're going to spend 3 hours and come up with something that doesn't change as a DoD and has, the ultimate polish on it. That's not the idea behind it.
One thing that I might do as well, just to make sure that we are really finding lots of value in all the items. We're not building things into our definition of done that don't have value. One thing that I might recommend doing is just, I'm trying to grab a bunch of icons here and duplicate it. I don't know if I'm going to get it in time, but let everybody vote. Give everybody like dots to vote with which ones are actually giving us the most value. So they put a high value item. Everybody puts $100 bill on if they think it's a high value. Lower ones won't get as much money. And then you can start asking them, okay, I see this item in our definition of done isn't really showing that we as a team find a lot of value in it. Is it something that we can drop off the definition of done? It's creating more work than the value that it is bringing to the product and the team. So you can kind of do that, have that conversation with them. I like to use money for those conversations because people mentally create value with money, but it's an idea. You could drop off and just whichever ones don't get a lot of money assigned to it from the team, then, well, let's talk and see if there's really value. Or are we just simply, burdening the team with extra stuff to do?
Great idea to do it that way. Awesome. All right, let's move on. What is the role of the Scrum Master and Product Owner in defining and enforcing the definition of done? So the Scrum Master and the Product Owner, they don't define the definition of done, Scrum Master specifically facilitates the event. So they may facilitate the Miro board here or Miro board, and then the actual meeting that you're in to make sure there's active participation and whatnot. But they're not the ones defining it. The product owner likewise contributes to the definition of done. They may have some things to say about the acceptance criteria, but the team as a whole defines the definition of done. In the case of multiple teams, it's the team of teams, right? So each team can have their own, but you need that program level that we spoke about earlier. Okay, in the interest of time, we have one more question we're going to breeze through really quickly. In an agile environment where requirements can evolve, how can we ensure that the definition of done remains adaptable and relevant throughout the project's life cycle? Got to stay with those changes, I'd say. As the requirements evolve, you look back and keep pace with those DODs. They have to evolve too, right? So there's no like black and white answer to this that you should always update them every month, every 6 months, 9 months. It depends. It depends on the context. If you're in some of these new disruptive areas, you may have to constantly look at your DOD, right? And that may mean every other sprint, perhaps. But if you're in some of these, more established industries, then it may not be as frequent. All right, I think we have now come to the end of our regularly scheduled program.
Yes, we have. Oh, well,
Questions are answered, by the way, so that's good.
it was a pleasure to talk about definition of done with you and with you guys. Hit us up on LinkedIn if you have any questions that further past this. I'm more than happy to work and talk with anybody and kind of help you hammer through any issues that you guys may have or concerns or thoughts. Let us know. And otherwise,
Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Yep. Bye, guys. Have a good one.